My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28 years old. And just a few months ago, I was standing on the graduation stage at the University of Washington, receiving my master's degree in business administration to the applause of friends and colleagues. It should have been one of the happiest days of my life, a milestone I had spent nearly a decade working and studying to achieve. But like every other important milestone before it, that moment was missing something, or rather, missing the people I should have been able to call my family. From the time I was a child, I understood my role in the house. I was the one who gave in, the one who would sacrifice to keep the peace, the one endlessly compared to Ashley, my sister 3 years younger and the golden girl in our parents' eyes. Richard and Linda Carter, my parents, live in a quiet coastal town in Oregon, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and gossip can travel through every cafe in a single morning. To the neighbors, we were the picture-perfect family. My father ran a long-standing hardware store, my mother worked at the city library, and my sister and I grew up in a 2-story wooden house with flowers hanging from the balcony and Christmas lights still glowing into February. But what the neighbors never saw was the stark imbalance in the way my parents treated me compared to Ashley. Ashley was the long-awaited child, cherished and protected as if the world might break her at any moment. When Ashley wanted to take dance lessons, my parents immediately hired a private instructor. When she said she wanted to travel to Europe, to broaden her horizons, they bought the plane tickets without hesitation. And me? I was taught that money was hard to earn, that you need to be independent to learn to appreciate things, that you couldn't always rely on your parents. So, from the age of 16, I worked evening shifts at a roadside cafe, saving every dollar for books and tuition, while Ashley never had to wonder where her next meal would come from. I used to think this was just a difference in parenting styles, that my parents were making me stronger. But over time, I realized this favoritism wasn't some grand parenting strategy, it was a choice, and it was never a choice in my favor. I still remember my undergraduate graduation day. My parents arrived nearly an hour late because we had to take Ashley shopping for her performance costume, and when I received my first diploma, they snapped a few quick photos and left before the ceremony even ended. The day I told them I had been accepted into the MBA program at the University of Washington, my father simply nodded and said, "Good. But don't expect us to help with the money." So I did exactly as they said. I handled it all myself. I applied for scholarships, worked part-time, took on extra marketing consulting projects for small businesses, and spent 2 full years juggling a full-time course load with over 40 hours of work each week. On graduation day, I knew they wouldn't be there, and sure enough, the seats reserved for my family sat empty. But right after the ceremony, as I was taking pictures with friends on the lawn in front of the main building, I received an unexpected call from my maternal grandparents' attorney. The deep, steady voice of Mr. Samuel Pierce, their longtime lawyer, came through the line. "Emily, your grandparents left their entire estate to you. We need to meet to discuss the details." I froze, not because of the money, since I didn't even know the amount yet, but because I had never realized my grandparents trusted and loved me that much. My maternal grandparents, Harold and Margaret Lewis, were the ones who nurtured the best parts of who I am. Their old seaside home, with red brick walls, a wide porch overlooking the ocean, and a rose garden that bloomed brilliantly every summer, was where I would go whenever I felt lost. They lived simply, but with great care, spending most of their days reading, gardening, and telling me stories about their youth in the 1952nd, back when this town was still a small fishing village. When I was in high school, I spent nearly every weekend there, helping my grandfather mend fences, baking apple pies with my grandmother, and most importantly, listening. It was something I rarely had the chance to do in my own home. In their final years, as their health declined, I was the one who took them to doctor's appointments, handled their banking, paid their bills, and cared for every small need. My parents and Ashley rarely showed up except for Thanksgiving or Christmas, and even then, it was usually just to take a few pictures for social media. So, when Mr. Samuel told me they had left everything to me, I knew it wasn't random or favoritism. It was recognition. A few days later, as I sat in Mr. Samuel's warm, wood-paneled office in the center of town, he placed a thick folder in front of me and said, "Your grandparents' current estate value is about $1 million, including the old house and their financial investments. They want you to have full control." I sat there in silence, feeling a mix of emotion, gratitude, deep affection, and a flicker of apprehension. When I left his office that day, I drove along the coastal road back to Seattle, the ocean's salty wind wrapping around my thoughts. $1 million. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but I knew the real value wasn't just in the money or the property, it was in the years of memories, the sunlit mornings on that red brick porch, the smell of my grandmother's coffee, and my grandfather's chuckle as he read the morning paper. And because I understood that, I also knew this wouldn't be a fairy tale for long. In my family, anything of value instantly became a target. My parents had a long history of borrowing belongings or money from others with promises to return them, only to disappear along with the item and the promise. I still remember when I was a college freshman, my aunt gave them a large sum of money to invest in my father's store. 6 months later, the store was unchanged, the money was gone, and whenever my aunt asked about it, my mother would skillfully change the subject or scold her for making such a big deal about money in the family. With Ashley, it was different. My parents never had to borrow from her because they had already decided everything belonged to her from the start. From her first car, to her trip to Europe, to the small apartment in Portland they bought as an investment, but ultimately let her live in rent-free, it all happened without anyone else's input. That's why, the moment I signed the inheritance documents from Mr. Samuel, I knew I had to move first. I couldn't wait until they found out and then try to protect it by then, it would be too late. I reached out to an old friend from law school who now worked at a major real estate law firm in Seattle. She introduced me to an attorney named Daniel Hart, a man in his 40s who spoke softly but whose eyes missed nothing. We met at a small cafe near Capitol Hill, where he spread my file across the table, flipped through each page, and nodded. "Emily, I've handled a lot of inheritance disputes, and honestly, if your family history is what you've just described, you need to secure these assets immediately. The best way is to put everything into an irrevocable trust," he said, his tone calm but firm. He explained the structure of an irrevocable trust, a type of trust that, once established, cannot be unilaterally changed or revoked by the original owner, with assets completely separated from personal property. I would serve as the trustee, the only person with the authority to manage and make decisions regarding the trust, but legally, the assets would no longer be in my name. That meant anyone checking public records would find no connection between me and the house or the investments. I agreed on the spot, and over the next 3 weeks, we worked nonstop. Daniel coordinated with an asset management company to establish an LLC owned by the trust, and all utility accounts for the house, electricity, water, taxes, insurance were transferred to the company's name. The property title was updated, stamped, and stored in the law firm safe, with copies kept at a bank in Seattle, far from the coastal town where my parents might accidentally gain access. The bank accounts my grandparents had left were closed, and all funds were moved into a new account belonging to the trust, secured with 2-factor authentication accessible only to me and Daniel. I remember vividly the moment I signed the final document, placing my pen under the words, "Irrevocable Living Trust Agreement." It was a mix of relief and vigilance, like locking the last door between myself and the hands that had taken so much from me before. I told no one, not even close friends. When my parents called to ask, "When are you moving into your grandparents' house?" in a tone that was half concern, half probing, I just smiled and said I was still busy in Seattle. When Ashley texted, "Have you thought about selling the house and splitting the money? I need capital to open a nail salon with my friend," I replied with a single word. Number. I let them believe I hadn't done anything, that everything was still untouched, so they would stay complacent and keep underestimating me, just as they always had. In the weeks that followed, I kept going to work as usual, still driving back to the town on weekends to check on the house, mow the lawn, and water the roses my grandmother once tended. Every time I stepped inside that house, I felt a sense of peace, but there was always a quiet warning echoing in my mind. They will come. Sooner or later. And because of that, I held my secret even tighter. I instructed Daniel to ensure that no one but me would receive any notifications or correspondence related to the trust. All bills were paid online, leaving no paper trail in the house. I even installed a discreet security camera system, hidden from plain sight, just to make sure that if anyone decided to drop by unexpectedly, I would know immediately. Once everything was in order, I felt like I could breathe a little easier. I had built a solid legal wall around my grandparents' assets, a wall my parents and Ashley couldn't tear down with a few forged documents or a tearful story. But I also knew that, for them, that wall would only make them want to climb higher, dig deeper. And when that day came, I would be ready. In the first few months after everything had been fully transferred into the trust, things were unusually quiet. No urgent phone calls, no long-winded text messages filled with exclamation marks, no surprise appearances by my parents at my grandparents' house with the excuse of just passing by. But that silence didn't give me peace. On the contrary, it felt like a still lake where I knew for certain there were undercurrents moving beneath the surface. Occasionally, in our brief phone calls, my mother would say things that sounded casual but carried a heavy undertone. It would only be fair if your grandparents left the house to both you and your sister, or, Ashley has so many memories there too, you should think about sharing so she doesn't feel excluded. I would just smile faintly, give a non-committal, neither confirming nor denying, letting them interpret my silence however they wanted. Ashley was more subtle. She began dropping by for the most ordinary reasons, bringing me some cookies Mom had just baked, delivering a few items. Mom said she left at Grandma and Grandpa's, or, sometimes, simply stopping in because she was passing through on the way back from Portland. But each time, Ashley's eyes were never really on my face. They drifted over the bookshelves, the wall where my grandparents' photo hung, and especially the wooden cabinet where I kept unimportant papers, at least unimportant to me, but potentially very interesting to someone looking for proof of ownership. I never let her stay alone in the living room, and whenever Ashley would accidentally ask, "Do you still have the house papers?" I just want to look at them for fun. I would smile and steer the conversation elsewhere as if I hadn't heard the question. My parents also started behaving differently. After years of near neglect, they suddenly seemed far more interested in me. One Friday evening, I received an invitation to come home for dinner, with Mom adding pointedly, "We need to have a family talk, nothing's more important than this." When I arrived, the meal was far more elaborate than usual. Roast meat, wine, freshly baked apple pie. Throughout dinner, the conversation revolved around phrases like managing the inheritance together, preserving the memories your grandparents left, and making sure everyone benefits fairly. They never said it outright, but every word was meant to remind me that, in their eyes, my grandparents' house and assets were not mine alone, they were family property. I nodded, smiled occasionally, neither rejecting nor agreeing, letting them believe I had made no legal preparations, that I was still the obedient daughter who could be persuaded. Other times, my father would call with an unusually cheerful tone, asking if I needed anyone to help maintain the house, saying he knew some workers who could repair the roof, repaint the porch, or check the wiring for safety. I knew it was just an excuse to get people inside, and I would always decline politely, saying I was learning more about property management and wanted to handle it myself. He would pause for a few seconds, then change his tone, half joking, half serious. "Just afraid you won't be able to hold on to it, and then you'll have to call us in." I would simply respond with a light laugh, never taking the bait. During that time, I also started watching them more closely. I noticed Ashley began posting vague social media updates about fairness and sharing within the family, sometimes accompanied by photos of my grandparents' house taken from a distance, clearly from her drop-by visits. My parents, meanwhile, started reconnecting with relatives they rarely spoke to, as if building a quiet network of support. I heard from an aunt that my mother had been telling people, "Emily's young, so she needs guidance to make sure she doesn't waste what her grandparents left." All of it came together into a clear picture. They were preparing for a big move, but they weren't ready to strike just yet. I kept my routine unchanged, still visiting my grandparents' house every weekend to tend the garden and clean inside, still working steadily in Seattle. But in my mind, I knew this was only the calm before the storm. They needed time to find a legal angle, or at least a convincing story that could win sympathy from others. And I needed this same time to watch, to memorize every look, every offhand remark, every subtle gesture that might be a fragment of a larger plan. My silence wasn't passivity. It was strategy. I let them feel confident that I wasn't on guard, that I was still the same Emily from years ago, the girl too buried in her studies to think about protecting her own interests. Because when they believed the prey was standing still, they would draw closer, and that was exactly when I wanted them in my sights. That morning, the coastal town lay under a thin veil of clouds, with weak sunlight spilling over the front yard, glinting off scattered red and gold maple leaves along the stone walkway. I wore a gray sweater, broom in hand, leisurely sweeping the leaves into a corner, listening to the distant crash of waves. The salty tang of the morning breeze, the cries of seagulls woven into the rustle of leaves, made the moment feel unusually peaceful until the hum of an engine broke it apart. A familiar black SUV turned into the driveway, its tires crunching over the gravel. I recognized it immediately. It was my parents' car. Before I could even wonder why they were here, the passenger door swung open and Ashley stepped out, her golden hair tied neatly back, her face glowing as if she'd just achieved something monumental. My mother followed, carrying a slim folder in her hands, while my father climbed slowly out of the driver's seat, wearing that smile I knew too well, the one he used right before making some important announcement. Ashley broke the silence first. "Hey, sis," she said brightly, striding toward me as though we were about to share some wonderful news. "This house is in my name now. Mom and Dad want you to move out this week so I can renovate and sell it. I already have a potential buyer." The words spilled out in one breath, without a single pause, as if everything had been decided long ago and I was merely being informed. I tightened my grip on the broom handle, feeling the damp, cool wood against my palms, but kept my face calm. My father stepped forward, holding out a set of papers stamped with something in blue ink, pushing them toward me as he spoke. "We've been working with a lawyer. Turns out, in your grandparents' will, there was a section that wasn't updated after Grandma passed. Technically, the house should belong to both you and your sister, but your grandfather accidentally left that part out. We've fixed that error and transferred ownership to Ashley so it's easier to manage. You already have a place to live, don't you? This is the most reasonable solution." My mother stood beside him, nodding in agreement, her eyes carrying that look of "this is for everyone's benefit." I looked at the stack of papers, noting the pages printed from an unofficial source, the seal that looked suspiciously fake, the shaky signatures, and above all the way they presented it to me with such confidence, as if I would obediently nod and agree. Inside, I almost wanted to laugh, but outwardly, I only tilted my head slightly and let a thin smile curl across my lips. "Really?" My question came slowly, carrying no trace of surprise, more like an idle comment on the information I'd just been given. Ashley blinked, seemingly unsure why I was so calm. "Yes, really. You don't have to worry. I'll make sure everything is handled quickly. I think you can have all your things moved out within a week. I'll hire people to clear the place for renovation. Everything will go smoothly." Her voice held a hint of excitement, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. My father cut in, lowering his voice as though to soothe me. "Emily, you know this house needs constant upkeep, and Ashley has both the time and a clear plan. You're busy with work in Seattle, holding on to this place will only be a burden. This is the best way for everyone." My mother added. "Besides, Ashley will share a portion of the sale with you, won't you, Ashley?" Ashley nodded rapidly, though her eyes flashed with the certainty of victory. I said nothing more. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, giving them the confidence that I was actually considering their offer, when in reality, I had anticipated this exact scene months ago. I knew every step they would take, knew they would show up with a story, half true, half invented, knew they would present documents they thought would be enough to push me out of this house. And I also knew that today was not the day to expose everything. Instead of arguing, I leaned the broom against the porch wall, wiped my hands on my jeans, and spoke in an even tone. I've heard you. I didn't call them mom, dad, or sister in my reply, and that made Ashley's brow crease slightly, though she kept smiling. Good, then we'll be back soon to get started. I'll call the moving company today, she said with a note of relief. My father folded the papers, slipping them back into his jacket pocket as if the matter were already settled. They left after a few awkward pleasantries, the SUV rolling down the drive and disappearing around the bend, leaving a faint trace of exhaust mingling with the salt in the air. I stood there for a long moment, watching until the car was gone, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Not because I was accepting defeat, far from it, but because I knew the real game was only just beginning. They still thought I was the compliant daughter of years past, the one who would set aside her own rights to keep the peace in the family. But this time, they were completely wrong. Inside the house, I poured myself a cup of tea, settled into the armchair by the window, and opened my laptop. I sent Daniel a short message. They came, exactly as expected. Prepare for the next step. No. 2 days after their so-called confident announcement, the morning in the coastal town began under a thin veil of mist mixed with the scent of the sea. I had risen early not to clean or make breakfast, but to prepare for the moment I knew would come. The table in the living room was cleared, holding only the thick blue-bound file stamped with the name of the trust, its pages neatly organized and tabbed. Outside, on the wooden porch, I had placed an extra chair for my guest, Mr. Mark Harris, a representative from the County Office of Property Records. As the clock neared 10, the rumble of a truck engine sounded from the end of the gravel road, each rotation of the tires like a countdown. A white moving truck rolled forward, led by the familiar black SUV belonging to my parents. Ashley jumped out first from the passenger seat, dressed in a designer tracksuit, hair tied high, phone in hand as if ready to record her moment of triumph. My father stepped out from behind the wheel, his smile half reassurance, half assertion of control. My mother followed briskly, pointing toward the porch and signaling the two movers to start unloading the dollies from the truck. Their footsteps crunched over the gravel, laughter mingling with the sound, utterly convinced the matter was settled. But as they set foot on the walkway, the sight before them made them freeze. I stood there, arms folded across my chest, beside Mr. Mark Harris in a neatly tailored navy suit and striped tie, his silver-streaked hair combed smoothly back. In his hands was a thick file, the cover clearly bearing the trust's name, clipped with several documents bearing bold red seals. He didn't speak immediately, waiting until they had stepped a few paces closer. When the distance narrowed to just a few meters, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his official ID, holding it up just enough for them to see. Am I speaking with Mr. Richard Carter, Mrs. Linda Carter, and Miss Ashley Carter? His voice was clear, deep, and deliberate. The three of them exchanged glances, a flicker of confusion at his opening question. My father nodded, forcing a steady tone. Yes, what is this about? Mark glanced down at the file, then spoke. I'm here on behalf of the County Office of Property Records to inform you of the legal status of this property. According to our records, this house was placed into an irrevocable trust as of the 12th of April last year, with Miss Emily Carter as the sole trustee. That means any transfer of ownership attempted after that date, including through the documents currently in your possession, is legally void and, in this case, constitutes fraud. The statement dropped like a heavy stone. Ashley's smile vanished first, replaced by a rapid blink, as if scrambling for a defense. My mother's grip on the papers tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line, while my father stepped forward half a pace, his voice sharp. Fraud? What fraud? We just corrected an error in the will your grandparents forgot. Mr. Mark cut in politely but firmly. Sir, any correction or amendment made without legal authorization from the trustee and without going through the county's formal process is null and void. Furthermore, our records from Miss Emily show that you used an out-of-state service to produce the transfer documents, along with a notary seal that is not licensed in Oregon. These factors are sufficient to trigger a criminal investigation if necessary. I stayed silent, watching their reactions. The two movers, who had been standing at the edge of the porch, exchanged uneasy glances. One coughed lightly, then slowly stepped back toward the truck. Ashley swallowed hard, trying to regain her voice. What are you doing, Emily? We're family. I turned to meet her gaze directly, my voice dropping low. Family doesn't bring forged documents to throw me out of the house my grandparents trusted me to protect. Family doesn't hire people to clear out my belongings without my consent. Mr. Mark picked up where I left off, his voice still steady but each word weighted. I will file an official report of today's events, along with a formal warning. If you return here with any further intent to take possession, we will proceed to the next step, including contacting the police and the district attorney's office to open a case. He handed my father a copy of the notice, then turned to me. Miss Carter, all management and control rights to this property remain entirely with the trust, under your authority. My parents and Ashley lingered for a few seconds longer, as if hoping I might change my mind. When they saw nothing but my calm, steady gaze, my father spun on his heel, his voice clipped. Let's go. Ashley shot me a glare, spitting out. You'll regret this. I answered only with the faintest smile, a smile sharp enough to unsettle them more than any words could. The movers had nearly jogged back to the truck by then, packing up their gear far faster than they had unloaded it. When the SUV and moving truck rolled away, leaving the gravel drive quiet again, I exhaled slowly. Mr. Mark closed the file, handed me a copy, and said, They'll try again, but today you showed them it won't be easy. I nodded in thanks, walked him to his car, then stood on the porch looking out at the ocean. The waves kept their steady rhythm, as if no one had tried to disturb the peace of this house. But I knew this was only the opening round, and I'd have to be ready for whatever came next. 3 days after the confrontation on the porch with Mr. Mark Harris as witness, I returned to Seattle and tried to focus on my usual work. But that Wednesday afternoon, as I stepped into my apartment, I saw a yellow envelope placed neatly at the door. The corner bore the name of a law firm in Portland, and the neatly typed line, Atten, Emily Carter, told me exactly what I was about to read. Inside was a 4-page letter, printed on heavy paper in a formal serif font, titled, Formal Demand for Settlement. The sender, my mother's attorney. I sat down at the kitchen table and read every line. Right in the opening paragraph, they claimed my mother was acting on behalf of the family's interests and accused me of violating my moral and emotional obligations by not sharing my grandparents' estate. Then came the list of demands. $150,000 in cash as emotional distress compensation for my mother, joint ownership of the seaside house with Ashley, and a monthly stipend, until further notice, to ensure the family's long-term well-being. The reason? They wrote that my keeping the entire estate had caused severe emotional strain and damaged the mother, daughter, and sisterly bonds. By the time I finished reading, I felt equal parts amused and exhausted. Instead of reacting impulsively, I picked up my phone, opened my contacts, and found the name of the one person I knew could help me handle this. Sonia Patel, an estate and trust attorney Daniel had introduced to me when I was finalizing my grandparents' asset transfer. Sonia was in her early 40s, petite, soft-spoken, but with every word as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. I scheduled a meeting for the next morning at her downtown Seattle office, bringing both the letter and a copy of the trust documents. The moment I sat down across from her, Sonia opened the letter, skimmed through it, then looked up at me with a faint, tilted smile. Emily, they're playing legal intimidation games, and they think you'll panic. When I asked what she wanted to do first, her answer came immediately. We're going to send them a cease and desist demanding they stop all harassment, making it clear their claims have no legal basis. And then, we're going to investigate in the other direction. Within 2 days, Sonia had the letter drafted. Her tone in it was both polite and formidable, affirming the absolute legality of the irrevocable trust, stating that neither my mother nor Ashley had any legal claim, and warning that any further attempts to threaten or harass would result in legal action against them. The letter was sent via certified mail to both my mother's attorney and her home address in Oregon. But Sonia didn't stop there. Using Mr. Mark's file and the information I provided, Sonia traced the documents they had brought during the moving truck incident. She checked the notary stamp number and discovered it didn't exist in Oregon's notary database. Then, by reviewing the transaction registration code, she found the filing had been made through an out-of-state online property record service, one that several states had already flagged as a hub for forged filings designed to bypass local verification. And the name listed as the filer? Ashley Carter. When Sonia said it aloud, I felt both relief and a cold, sharp anger run down my spine. Relief, because we now had irrefutable proof this wasn't just a family misunderstanding, but a deliberate act of fraud. Anger, because my own sister, the girl who once stood next to me on the same high school graduation stage, had willingly signed her name on a forged document to steal our grandparents' home. Sonia's voice hardened. With this evidence, if they keep pushing, we'll hand it over to the fraud division of the district attorney's office. You won't need to say much, these documents will speak for themselves. I left Sonia's office that day with a copy of the preliminary investigative report, the cease and desist letter already sent, and a feeling completely different from when I'd first opened that yellow envelope at my door. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was only defending myself, I had started pushing back. I knew this wouldn't be the final move, but it was a solid one. And I also knew that on their side, they wouldn't retreat quietly. Only a week after Sonia sent the cease and desist, I began noticing a strange shift in how certain relatives spoke to me. An aunt in California suddenly texted to ask if I was doing okay and whether things were really as Linda said. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years called me, his voice meandering, bringing up awkward situations and hoping we can still keep family ties. I didn't need long to figure it out. This was the start of a new offensive, this time not aimed at my assets, but at me. 2 days later, my suspicion was confirmed when my phone buzzed with a message from Megan, my maternal cousin, the one I had always considered the most straightforward person in the family. Emily, I need to see you right away. Aunt Linda has been saying a lot about you to the whole family. It's not good. We arranged to meet at a small cafe in Olympia, each of us driving in from opposite directions. Megan arrived early, already seated in a secluded corner with her laptop open and a stack of sticky notes beside it. As soon as I sat down, she pulled the laptop toward herself and pressed play on a recording. My mother's voice came through clearly, tinged with a kind of feigned weariness. I don't want to speak ill of her, but Emily, she took advantage of my father's weakness to convince him to change the will. At that time, he wasn't of sound mind, everyone knows that. I even suspect she manipulated the legal process in ways he didn't fully understand. Megan paused, looking me straight in the eye. You know, she's not just saying this to one person. This is one of 12 voice messages I've gotten this past week. She's even created a group chat with several other cousins to tell and retell this story. I sat in silence, a wave of heat and cold running down my spine. Hearing my mother's voice, I realized she had escalated the narrative from a property dispute to moral and even criminal accusations. That wasn't just about damaging my reputation with family, it could impact my career in Seattle, where trust and credibility are everything. Megan pulled out her phone and scrolled through a string of messages from the group chat, lines like, "Emily's always selfish. Grandma and Grandpa would have wanted it split evenly. She's just good at taking advantage of situations." A few people had even embellished the story, suggesting I had tricked my grandfather into signing papers he hadn't read carefully. I lifted my head and asked Megan, "Do you believe any of this?" She shook her head immediately. "Number, I know who you are. But you have to understand, if she keeps saying it over and over, the relatives who don't see you often will start to believe it. And in this family, once they've bought into a story, it's nearly impossible to reverse it. Her words rang like a warning bell. Driving back, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. This was no longer about them wanting the house or $150,000. This was an attempt to destroy my image, to turn me into the greedy granddaughter who betrayed her own grandparents. If I let it go, the rumor would spread, and soon everything I said would be questioned. The social pressure, the scolding phone calls from relatives, and the advice to just compromise for the sake of peace would push me into a corner. I'd seen my mother do this to others in the family when I was younger, and I knew once she set her sights on someone, she wouldn't stop until that person was isolated. That night, I called Sonia and recounted everything Megan had shown and played for me. Sonia was silent for a long moment before saying, "Emily, this is a reputational attack. We're no longer just defending your assets, we have to protect your credibility too. The good news is, you have direct evidence from Megan messages, recordings, the group chat. That's gold in front of any legal authority or if we need to prove malicious intent." I agreed instantly. We decided that from now on, every piece of information, no matter how small, would be documented. Screenshots, audio files, names of those involved, exact dates and times. When I hung up the phone, it was close to midnight. Sitting alone in my apartment, I realized this was no longer a simple battle over property rights. This was a fight for the narrative over who would be believed and who would be branded the traitor. And if I lost control of my own story, everything my grandparents had left behind, not just the house, but their honor and the memory of them, would be twisted forever. From that moment on, I knew I would not let that happen. The next morning, I spent hours in Sonia's office, seated at a dark wooden table strewn with documents, an external hard drive, and a laptop already open to a working draft. Sunlight from the tall window caught the edges of the manila folders, making them look like cards waiting to be turned over. Sonia sat opposite me, her thin-framed glasses sliding down her nose, eyes fixed on the screen as she typed the first lines of the statement of facts. We started with the most clear and verifiable events, the dates of my grandparents' passing, the original contents of the will, the timeline for establishing the Irrevocable Trust, and the lawfully notarized transfer documents. From there, Sonia methodically listed the evidence of fraud. Photographs of the fake notary seal, the state database entry confirming the registration number did not exist, and the filing records showing the property was submitted through an out-of-state online service under the name Ashley Carter. Then came the $150,000 demand letter from my mother's lawyer, spelling out the joint ownership request and monthly stipend wording so blatant it couldn't be brushed off as a misunderstanding. Next was the more sensitive section, the smear campaign. I handed over every screenshot Megan had sent of the group chat, the audio clip of my mother accusing me of taking advantage of Grandpa when he was weak, and the list of recipients Megan confirmed had heard or read those accusations. Sonia listened to every recording, jotting down each accusatory phrase word for word. "Emily, we're not going to embellish a single thing. Everything will be presented exactly as it is, with dates, times, and sources. That way, anyone who reads it will know this is the truth, not your retelling," she said, her tone razor sharp. 3 days later, the finished statement, 12 pages long, was printed on Sonia Patel's law office letterhead, the title clear, Statement of Facts and Supporting Evidence, the Carter Family Trust Dispute. We drafted a short opening email for me to sign. To my aunts, uncles, and cousins, I know there have been many stories circulating recently about me and my grandparents' estate. Before anyone reaches a conclusion, I want you to have the chance to read the entire truth, with verifiable evidence attached. After today, I will not discuss this matter again. If you believe me, I'm grateful. If you don't, that is your choice, but at least it will be a choice based on facts. All het. The recipient list included 27 email addresses and 4 mobile numbers for sending the PDF via text, everyone my mother had contacted or mentioned in the group chat. Sonia sent it from her office email to ensure it carried legal weight and couldn't be dismissed as rumors Emily spread. When the soft ding confirmed the message had left the outbox, I felt both relief and anticipation, like setting a critical piece on the chessboard and waiting for my opponent's move. The responses came faster than I expected. Within 2 hours, I had 6 messages and 3 missed calls. One cousin phoned immediately, his voice heavy with regret. "Emily, I'm sorry. I believed Aunt Linda because, honestly, I'd heard her repeat it so many times. But after seeing the evidence, there's nothing left to say." And Aunt emailed back, "Thank you for sending this. I had a different impression before, and I'm sorry for doubting you." Even a cousin who had always been close to Ashley texted, "At least now I understand why you stayed quiet. Stay strong." Of course, not everyone changed their minds. 3 people, all from my father's side, responded sharply, accusing me of trying to manipulate the story and only presenting what benefits you. One even claimed I had fabricated the documents, despite the fact they were certified copies from the notary office and the county property records department. I wasn't surprised when someone has already decided what to believe. The truth isn't always enough to sway them. But for every one of those objections, I received at least 5 messages of support. The most unexpected was a call from Aunt Robin, who for years had treated Ashley like her own daughter. Her voice trembled. "Emily, I'm truly ashamed. I've said things about you I shouldn't have, and I believed what your mother told me. I just finished reading everything, and I don't know how to apologize enough." I didn't scold her. I simply told her I hoped she understood why I had to do this. We ended the call in silence, but it was a lighter, easier silence than before. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, watching the glow of the street lamps reflecting on the ocean. I knew sending that statement wasn't just about clearing my name, it was about breaking the psychological siege my mother and Ashley were trying to build around me. They had lost control of the narrative, and that meant they'd be forced to choose another tactic. I just didn't know yet whether they would retreat or escalate. But whatever they chose, I was more ready than I had ever been. Once the statement of facts had gone out and responses from relatives near and far started coming in, I knew I had regained part of the advantage. But my mother and Ashley's smear campaign wasn't only about tarnishing my reputation, it was about eroding the trust of those who might support me, to pressure me into conceding. If I wanted to end this game, I had to make them understand that any move against me would have consequences. And this time, I decided to start with something Ashley considered the foundation of her future: her brand new real estate career. One evening, I sat in my home office, the glow of my laptop screen reflecting off the thick case file I had been carefully building over the past weeks. Everything was there. The forged property transfer document with Ashley's name on it, the photo of the invalid notary seal, the verification from the state notary authority confirming the seal didn't exist, and the filing record showing the document had been submitted through an out-of-state online property service, one that multiple agencies had already flagged as a hotspot for fraudulent transactions. I also included the $150,000 demand letter, Sonia's cease and desist warning, and an appendix quoting the statutes on attempted property fraud and forged documents. The company Ashley had just joined was a boutique real estate firm in Portland, well known for its glossy Instagram presence and its loud marketing about professional ethics and transparent transactions. Their website had a dedicated contact form for reporting ethical violations or fraudulent conduct, along with a pledge to take all such reports seriously. I knew this was the door I needed to knock on. I drafted a short but precise email, attaching the entire case file as a numbered, indexed PDF. The opening lines were simple: "To the Ethics and Compliance Department at Horizons Land, I am submitting the attached file regarding your new employee, Ashley Carter. This file contains verifiable evidence of real estate fraud, including falsified documents and the use of an invalid notary seal in an attempt to unlawfully obtain property valued at over $1 million. I believe this information directly concerns your company's reputation and legal compliance obligations. Sincerely, Emily Carter." I didn't sign it by hand, just an electronic signature, and sent it from a personal email account protected with 2-factor authentication. When I hit send, my heart thudded hard, not from fear, but from knowing that once this information left my hands, the gears of another machine would begin to turn. I thought it would take at least a week for them to respond. But just 2 days later, while I was at the office in Seattle, my phone buzzed with a message from a familiar contact in the Oregon State Real Estate Association. Emily, word is Ashley Carter's personnel file at Horizons Land has been suspended. They're launching an internal investigation, and the file's already been sent to the State Real Estate Licensing Board. I read that twice before feeling a cool rush spread through my chest. The next update came quickly. That afternoon, Sonia called, a note of satisfaction in her voice. They didn't just terminate Ashley on the spot, they also sent their report to the board. And guess what? The county office has officially filed charges for attempted property fraud and forged documents, based on the evidence we'd previously provided to Mr. Mark. I leaned back in my chair, gazing out the window at the sheets of Seattle rain. The county's charging notice was sent directly to my mother's home address in Oregon, and I knew that the moment that envelope was opened, the air inside that house would change forever. Attempted property fraud wasn't just a phrase in a law book, it was a criminal charge, one that could leave a permanent stain on a record no employer or client would want to touch. Forged documents was even worse. It proved deliberate deception and interference with legal filings. Even if Ashley avoided jail time, those marks would follow her for years, closing nearly every door in her chosen profession. That evening, I got 11 missed calls from the same number, Ashley's brusters. No texts, no explanations, just call after call, as if she could shatter the silence through sheer persistence. I didn't pick up. I knew that if I did, I'd be pulled into a spiral of blame, threats, or pleas. Instead, I muted the phone, set it face down on the table, and let the rain outside play like a soundtrack to the quiet I'd fought to reclaim. The next day, Ashley's Instagram featured a black background with white text. Some people will destroy your life and pretend they're the victim. No one had to tell me who it was aimed at. But this time, I didn't feel anger or hurt, because everyone who mattered, everyone who knew the truth, had already seen the evidence. And the rest? I didn't need their belief. 2 months after the county's charges were filed, things seemed to slow. No more late-night calls, no more emails from my mother's attorney, no more secondhand gossip drifting to me through relatives. Then, on a Monday morning, just as I'd finished making my coffee and opened my mailbox, I found a thick white envelope with the return address of a law firm in Salem. Inside was a short letter, less than 3 paragraphs, its tone formal and cold. Our client, Mrs. Linda Carter, through our office, hereby withdraws all legal claims related to the Carter Family Trust and the property at 1254 Seaview Bluff Lane, Rockport, Oregon 97411. Mrs. Carter further requests that there be no future contact between herself and Miss Emily Carter, except where legally necessary. I stopped reading there, exhaled slowly, folded the letter, and placed it in my file cabinet. The feeling wasn't gloating triumph, it was closure. A door had shut, and this time, I had no intention of opening it again. That afternoon, I drove back to the coastal town. The gravel road leading to the house was just as it had always been, the maple trees on either side now blazing red and gold, signaling the arrival of autumn. The sunset cast a warm amber light over the ocean, the waves rippling gently like a vast mirror. I unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped into the house, silent after so many weeks. Outside, the wind whispered along the porch, while inside lingered the scent of aged wood and a faint trace of lavender from the diffuser I'd left on the table days before. I walked down the hallway, my fingers brushing the red brick walls, trailing past the neatly hung black and white photograph of my grandparents. In my mind, I heard my grandfather's voice, deep and deliberate. "You have to know how to protect what's worth keeping, Emily. Don't expect anyone else to do it for you." Back then, I thought he was only talking about this house, a tangible, physical inheritance. But after everything, I understood he'd meant more than that: honor, peace, and the right to decide my own life. I stopped in the living room, where the last light of day streamed through the large window, spilling across the worn wool rug. In that moment, all the noise of the past months, the accusations, the rumors, the calls, the demand letters seemed to dissolve. I was no longer the daughter who had to bite her tongue to keep the peace. I no longer carried guilt for setting boundaries with people who called themselves family but treated me as a resource to exploit. What remained was simply myself, steady and calmer than I had ever been. I know some would say I've been too harsh, that family is family no matter what, but I've learned what my grandparents understood long ago. Love is not permission for someone to hurt you over and over again. Setting boundaries and protecting your worth is not selfish. It's the only way to end the cycle of exploitation and begin a life built on respect. And if I have to choose between being labeled cold or returning to the place where every sacrifice I made was taken for granted, I will choose my peace, now and always. I stood for a while on the front porch, watching the sea fade into darkness. The waves kept their steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the house itself, patient, enduring. I smiled not because I had won a battle, but because I knew I had preserved exactly what my grandparents wanted. Not just the house, but myself whole, defined by no one, owned by no one. And in the chill of the evening wind, I whispered as if they could still hear me. I kept it safe, just like I promised.